Welcome to Fantasy Football Today Dynasty. I am your host, Heath Cummings, joined today by an old friend, Scott Boulanger, a.k.a. Jax Falcone. And, I say an old friend. I didn't mean you were old. I just meant you've been on the podcast several times over the last few years. But you are, dare I say, an old dog with a new trick.
Yeah. Thank you. Well said. Old. Hey, take it as it is. We've been doing this a while, and these gray hairs have been hard earned. So for sure, we're doing OTC. I've been with the Undroppables since 2019, and we have a new venture. I have a new venture, OTC, on the clock fantasy football. Stated goal is to be the best dynasty source available, and so we're really excited. So thanks.
Looking forward to seeing more about what you guys put together. I'm sure it's going to be just about everything anybody could want for Dynasty, and maybe I'll even make an appearance on the podcast.
I
think there's a very good chance that will happen. Well, on today's show, I was talking about the new. We've got a lot of new coaches. In fact, we think now it's not official, but we think we have all of the new coaches. So I thought it'd be a good time to kind of make a quick run through of those new coaches and see what we think they mean for Dynasty. But we always start with 3 questions for our guests. And if you didn't know, Mr. Jack Falcone is a New England Patriots fan. His team is in the Super Bowl. He's very excited, unlike 75% of America. And so I thought we'd do 3 Super Bowl questions.
Yeah.
A couple of them about your team. Is Drake May a clear top 2 quarterback in Dynasty now?
I think so. I think I have him as QB1, and that's not even one of those like homer takes. I just think at the age, the rushing upside, the downfield throwing, the institutional organizational security around him with Vrabel. And I just feel like at this particular point, there's not much more that you would want except for maybe dope weapons around him, which could be coming.
Yeah, I think as I look at it, I've got Josh Allen still as the pretty clear QB1, and I do value the fact that he's done it for a little bit longer. Like things change around Josh Allen, and he remains this elite fantasy option. Then I think between May and yes, I would still say Jaden Daniels. Yes, I would still say Lamar Jackson. I think you could include Jalen Hurts and Caleb Williams in that discussion. There's a pretty solid tier there of guys who could be 2. I currently have Drake May at QB2. I think it's worth remembering that the season that he just had, if that's the new baseline, then you're right. He's QB1 at 24. What we don't know, and what I talk about a lot, is that fantasy football is inherently a game of small sample sizes.
Yes.
And one full season feels like a new reality to us often.
But it isn't
and
always.
Often we find out the next year that it isn't. So I just like to see he starts off the first month of next year like he played this year, then I will probably have him as QB1 in Dynasty as well. But I agree with you that he is a clear
Tier
top
1,
2, tier 1, top 2 QB.
Yeah.
This one's not about your team, but Kenneth Walker has gained some steam over the last month in Dynasty and in his evaluation with the injury to Zach Charbonnet, with the success that Walker has had. And it's kind of been this way for most of for Walker's career. There's a certain segment of the population that just thinks he's so good. Why won't they give him all the work? There's other people who think, well, it's because every third run goes for negative yards and every third run goes for 10 yards. But regardless, the arrow is pointing up right now in terms of what his value is. Are you more likely to buy high or sell high on Walker?
I mean, I've been buying or trying to, and, in some cases been unsuccessful, but I thought, Ken Walker was a screaming buy the whole time. I thought he was going to have a slightly better year this year. Obviously Charbonnet ate into a little bit more of his output. But I think he's still a buy, because I don't think the price tag has gotten to the point where he's some sort of top 10 dynasty running back price. That's not, I don't think, what you have to pay. So look, if you're still paying running back 2 prices, look, we're not going to talk too much about the draft, but I mean, late first for Ken Walker, you doing that?
I think there are certainly situations where I would do that. So if that makes sense. Like
That's right.
I think there's definitely situations where I would do that. It depends on where you're at as a team. I was just trying to pull up on keep trade cut because listen, we talk about it all the time. There's so many different sources you can use for consensus value. That in my opinion, the benefit to keep trade cut is it seems to update a little bit quicker than some of the others. It's not always.
I got to tell you, we're going to have the OTC market value on OTC.com, OTCFantasyFootball.com. And I'm telling you, that is going to be one of the things that we feel really good about, one of the tools we have. So keep your eye on OTC.
Great plug there. And I'm looking forward to having another source because I think what we've found so far is that all of them have their various strengths. One of the strengths of keep trade cut is it generally reacts quickly.
Yes.
I'm not sure that I've seen that yet, though, because when you said at an RB2 price, kind of my distinction is if it's if it's 13 through 15, then I'm probably a sell. If it's a low end RB2, then I'm definitely a buy. And looking at his value or ranking on keep trade cut, he is currently RB18. So that's kind of right in the middle. I'd probably lean towards buy. He's right behind Chase Brown, Saquon Barkley, RJ Harvey, right ahead of Josh Jacobs, Travis Etienne, Javonte Williams. I'll buy him in that range.
Yeah.
I think if we see the Seahawks go in the Super Bowl and Walker has a good game, and then he gets an extension to stay in Seattle, we're probably going to see that price go up significantly. We'll see if that actually happens, and that would be the point where I'd probably move to a sell.
And before the Sharps injury and before his run here, he was, RB 24, 25 or something like that.
Right.
Like, so
he's already moved.
Exactly. So now that's actually the high price, right? This is the sort of not ceiling, but this is the spike, if you will. So yeah, I mean, buying high, I think I'm still okay with it in some scenarios, just like you said.
Question number 3. Do we have reason to keep Travion Henderson in the top 12 dynasty running backs?
I think so. I mean, look, obviously Ramondre was more than a thorn. He was the rose bush itself. So, he was great. Obviously, we thought that there was going to be a changing of the guards entirely, or at least you could have said that. But I still think, look, he was RB20 in a season that was very disappointing, especially early on. He had some big plays and whatnot. But look, RB20 is an RB2. Last I checked. I mean, you got to check my math on this one, Heath. But, if we're getting a rookie season, RB20 season from Travion at his age in this offense, again, coupled with Drake May and Ramondre's not going to last forever. I think he's going to take on a bigger role next year when they can trust him, when they can get him into camp, when they can he's a veteran next year, right? He's still a rookie this year. Yeah, I do think that that's where he belongs. If you're a little bit hesitant, might as well sell now, but I'm not at all.
I think people will be surprised. I'm going through the process, and I do this generally the week of the Super Bowl, of just going through all the guys that I feel confident are going to be on the same team next year and kind of starting the projections process.
Right.
And so I'm always looking at like, how were things actually divided? And I think people would be surprised to see that Travion Henderson averaged more rush attempts per game than Ramondre's. I think that the bigger surprise from what I was expecting was that Ramondre was actually better in the passing game than Henderson was. And I know Henderson this week has talked about the difficulty of learning pass blocking in the NFL as someone who came in viewed as a good pass blocker in college. And he said it's just a totally different thing. I'm hopeful with a full off season in an NFL system, he'll improve some of those deficiencies and we'll see just a little more work go his way. I'd still rather have Henderson next year. I still have Henderson ahead of Walker and as a top 12 running back. So I agree with you on that. Let's take our first break. When we come back, we're going to jump into the Raiders, the Browns, the Steelers, and more right after this.
You can always count on Sundays with the NFL on CBS and Paramount Plus. So even if you can't count on accurate expiration dates,
that is a rookie mistake,
or people appreciating your fashion sense,
Jim, the crowd is not on board here.
You can always count on Sundays with the NFL on CBS, streaming on Paramount Plus.
Glad we wear our good jerseys.
Yeah. We are back, and oddly enough, I want to start with the one that's not quite official, because I think it's the one that everybody was most excited to see where he was going to go this offseason. It's Klint Kubiak, who is doing a very good job this week of saying, I only want to talk about the Seahawks and I only want to talk about the Super Bowl, and everybody else just wants to talk about him taking the Raiders job, which is what the expectation is will happen. This is undeniably, I think, a positive for the Raiders' offensive prospects over the next 3 to 5 years. Would you agree with that?
It's got to be. I mean, Klint Kubiak has been, obviously, I think a lot of this has, Seattle's success has to do with Mike Macdonald, who's been an amazing defensive coach, both in Seattle and previously in Baltimore, where, someone had showed, their rise from like they were a 20-something defense to a 12-something defense to a top 5 defense. Both times he's been, defensive coordinator and head coach in Baltimore and Seattle. So I think there's something to be said about that. But I think, when you look at Klint Kubiak, I think that he's been, they were 27th in pass rate over expected was Seattle. So I think it's a little run centric, which has helped the run game, Charbonnet. And we see it with Ken Walker down the stretch here when there's a single sort of one back, right? If we could morph Charbonnet and Ken Walker into one player, that would have been a very exciting player to roster in fantasy. Well, I think that's now Ashton Genty. So I think really the big winner is Ashton Genty, who was certainly not living up to expectations in year one. I think he's going to exceed them in year two.
And just to kind of back that up, if you take Ken Walker and Zach Charbonnet and combine them last year, you get 405 rush attempts for 1,757 yards and 17 touchdowns. Oh yeah, they caught 51 passes for over 400 yards as well.
Yeah, unfortunately, you can't do that.
You can't do that. And I don't think it's fair to Genty to expect that he's going to get he's not going to play 100%. No. But he is, in my opinion, the clear winner here.
Yes.
Where it's more complicated, I think, is the fact that what we saw from Kubiak in New Orleans during the short period of time there was that Rashid Shaheed and Chris Olave were both pretty efficient when they had a quarterback. And what we saw in Seattle this year was that JSN, it was comical the first half of the season, the fact that we're just going to throw, what if we just threw the ball to our best player 40% of the time?
It's unbelievable.
And guess what? It turns out it worked.
Right.
The strange thing about the Raiders and the roster that he's going to take over is that their best receiver is Brock Bowers, and their wide receiver room is, no offense to Trey Tucker,
empty,
barren.
Yeah.
So do you anticipate that this is a great thing for Brock Bowers because Kubiak's just going to get the ball to his best players? Or are you anticipating the Raiders will make a big move for a wide receiver one, and maybe it's not the best thing for Brock Bowers?
Well, they've got to make a move for a wide receiver, whether it's a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. They need to make some moves for wide receivers. So I don't know exactly how that shakes out. And the type of player that is could negatively impact Brock Bowers. But I do think that, I hesitate to say, well, Kubiak wasn't very good for tight end. Well, maybe he didn't have good tight ends. As you point out, he has elevated the weapons that were on his team. Shaheed was a lot better, in New Orleans. You get the drift. So point being here is I think it is very good for Brock Bowers because it's going to be an efficient offense. I do think if there's a lot of weapons there, I think it's a little bit of an issue. It's kind of like the Shaheed and Cooper Kupp didn't quite get there because of that pass rate over expected. They're not going to be leaning towards the pass more so than they are to the run. So for those reasons, there could be some capped upside in the pass game. You're also going to have a presumably rookie quarterback in Fernando Mendoza, who I guess is good. We'll see, right? So we have no idea there. So there's definitely some questions around the pass game. But Brock Bowers is sort of, I don't know that you can downgrade him more than a very, very small notch below Trey McBride maybe, but he's the tight end 1 or 2, no matter how you look at him.
Yeah, I think you can make a pretty strong case. And we had a question in the chat about Drew Petzing's impact on the Lions offense. And what I would just say is we're going to talk about Mike LaFleur in a moment, and I don't know if we'll have any strong takes on that hire. But I think you can craft a pretty good argument that going from Drew Petzing or Kevin Stefanski, who Petzing came from, to anyone is probably a negative for tight end targets because those guys have run the most tight end centric offenses in the NFL. So if you're talking about things are probably better for Brock Bowers than they were under the Pete Carroll regime. I don't think that's saying too much. Right. Things are probably worse for Trey McBride with Drew Petzing gone. We'll find out if that's true. I still prefer Bowers to McBride on Mendoza. I like the way you said that. He's good, I guess. We're going to find out in the next years. But in terms of rookie picks, this hire, when it's official, in my opinion, is a positive for the development of Mendoza.
I would think so.
Very nice things with Carr and Darnold the last couple of years, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, to get Sam Darnold to play at the level that he's played at is really incredible. So yeah, you gotta think this is a win all the way around for the Raiders offensively.
We mentioned Stefanski. He left the Browns. The guy that took his job was the guy I think all Giants fans were hoping was going to be their offensive coordinator in Todd Monken. And this is really an interesting situation because the Browns drafted a quarterback last year, drafted a running back last year, drafted a star tight end that we talked about all year last year. Harold Cannon, drafted a couple of wide receivers who made almost zero impact. And Todd Monken returns to Cleveland. Is this a situation where it's just like if he finds a quarterback, it could be good?
I think that's right. I was wondering kind of what, you might ask about this team and, where the analysis would come from. Is it a Harold Fannin question? Is it a running backs question? I wanted to look at Harold Fannin, who I think is the one sort of variable, if you will. And, the Ravens were second to last in neutral pass rate last year. Only Cleveland, I think, was worse if I remember right. I mean, no, they weren't. But the Ravens were second to last in neutral pass rate, and I think what we look at with Cleveland was that they were first in 12 personnel last year. So that's where they were number one, and Baltimore was third. So when we look at Monken, I don't think he comes in and does anything too drastically different in terms of tight end usage, I should say, right? Obviously, the scheme may be a little bit different, of course, but I think that at least he does. Now, he's had two tight ends in the past, as they did in Cleveland with Njoku and Fannin, likely and Andrews. But they've been very tight end friendly in the past, as Baltimore and Monken. So I think that we'll tend to see Fannin be okay in this change. There's got to be some concern for you and I, being these huge Fannin fans, where we understand that he's a non-traditional tight end. He's not just line him up in line and should be just fine, just run regular plays. You kind of have to understand that he's a bit of a move tight end that can really create mismatches all over the field and in the running game, because he's a great run blocker in space. Right. So everything that Harold Fannin is special if used properly, and I hope and think this will be just fine for him.
And I think it's worth remembering that Monken was with Brock Bowers at Georgia. So he has some experience finding creative ways to use a tight end. Do you think there's any chance, we saw the clips of him talking to Shedeur Sanders after he got to Cleveland, that Cleveland may not be in a position to draft a franchise quarterback because there might only be one of them in this class? Is there any chance that we just get Shedeur Sanders week 1 starter and maybe week 17 starter?
Wow. I mean, I guess anything is possible. I honestly have no clue. Like, I try to think about what I would do if I were running the Browns, but that's a fool's errand, because the Browns have done basically everything that I would not do in terms of the quarterback position. Starting with the Deshaun Watson debacle, who, by the way, becomes healthy and a factor in this conversation. I don't think he's a factor, but he has to be, because he's under contract for a lot of money and was at one point awesome, which is incredible. That's actually part of the calculus here. But they need to find a quarterback one way or the other, whether it's Shedeur Sanders or anybody else. I wonder sometimes with, giving up on Kyler, giving up on Tua, giving up on some of these guys, maybe that this is a home for one of those guys. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, no, I think what I think from a dynasty perspective is that with all of these quarterback openings, we probably should be a little more open to the possibility that Kyler and Tua are going to land somewhere. I wouldn't, if they're on your roster and you thought they were your QB2 or QB1 in Kyler's case, I wouldn't necessarily be feeling like, well, now I don't have a quarterback. I think there's a good chance by the time we get to April that it looks like those guys are starting somewhere. I'd be okay if it was Cleveland. Now, it's interesting when you talk about the Kubiak to the Raiders and Monken to the Browns, both of these guys coming from teams that were very run heavy last year.
Right.
I think the difference is Cleveland has a good enough defense that Monken could keep that up. Whereas Kubiak probably will stay run heavy compared to situation, but the situation he's going to find himself in is going to lend itself more towards the pass. So is this a situation where Quinshon Judkins could be Derrick Henry light over the next few years?
You would think. I mean, look, not a ton of pass game upside for Judkins. So, you got to hope that the offense is good. That's been my main issue with Judkins coming out, was not necessarily that he's not good. Said he went to an offense that was dysfunctional, likely won't be in the red zone, likely won't have a lot of end zone, red zone looks. And, you wouldn't project Judkins to lead the NFL in touchdowns or to get 10 plus rushing touchdowns. So for all those reasons, he becomes a little bit of a lower upside, 2-down grinder, even though that's not necessarily his full profile. I think if he were on a dope team, he'd be great. So we'll have to see. Again, quarterback, I think, unlocks everything for Cleveland. If they can get a little bit of, quarterback play, then everything else kind of changes. We even saw that with Shador coming in. Dylan Gabriel was so safe and, close to the vest, but once Shador got in there, who made a lot of mistakes and took a lot of bad sacks, all the rest of it. I mean, his QBR was bad, but when he threw it down the field, he was able to at least connect with people down the field a bit. You saw everything kind of open up a little bit. So I think if they can just get maybe Shador year 2, being better than last year, or somebody else that can actually run an NFL offense, that would be a huge, huge boon to Judkins and his touchdown upside.
And I will say, to Monken's credit, that the 3 best seasons for Lamar Jackson in terms of yards per attempt as a passer are the last 3 seasons. 2 of the 3 best seasons he's had in terms of touchdown passing rate have been the last 2 seasons. Monken had a positive impact on Lamar's passing efficiency.
Yes.
And so whoever the quarterback is, I would not be surprised if they are better than they have been in the past, or if it's Shador, if he takes a step forward in year 2, probably not to the point to where you want to start him, but maybe to a point to where you feel okay if he's your QB2, if everything else gets better. Now, we started off with Kubiak and Monken. I think those are 2 fan bases probably feeling at least a little bit energized or hopeful about their head coaching situation. Steelers fans seem absolutely distraught. Because they think, in my opinion, that they just kind of got rid of one Mike for another. And they got rid of one pretty close to 500 for another. From a fantasy perspective, though, forgetting about winning and losing football games or doing creative, fun things, this seems like it's probably a pretty good thing for the functionality of the Steelers offense. And in my opinion, Mike McCarthy is probably going to be better for fantasy football managers who have Steelers on their team than Arthur Smith was.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's funny because you go from one of the coolest coaches in the NFL to the version of a coach that is not cool. You're never like, we got Mike McCarthy. I don't know, this is kind of rough. So for those reasons, I would be totally bummed out. I mean, when you've got Mike Tomlin, you just feel like you have the coolest bunch of dudes going. You're, fired up the team, the whole thing. I don't think there's too much rah-rah from McCarthy, but schematically, he's I probably think better for the offense. And, there's been those that have pointed out that McCarthy and Tomlin, if you put their if you blind rank their stats, win, loss, Super Bowl appearance, playoff win, loss, the whole thing, they're almost identical anyway. Right. So there's probably much ado about nothing in terms of all that. But that all being said, do you think Aaron Rodgers and Mike McCarthy are going to get the old tape deck out and play the old tunes together?
I fully anticipate that is what's going to happen.
Yes.
I expect that Aaron Rodgers is going to give us at least 3 months of drama
Yes.
before we get any sort of resolution. He'd like to make sure that everybody talks about him for long enough.
That's great.
But the kind of key question I have about McCarthy to the Steelers is DK Metcalf.
Sure.
Because he is the basically everything they have at wide receiver. And McCarthy's offenses over the last 10 years have featured a very strong presence from the wide receiver one, whether it was Jordy Nelson, whether it was Devontae Adams, whether it was CeeDee Lamb. Generally speaking, you see 8, 9, 10 targets per game for the wide receiver one in a McCarthy offense, which would be fantastic for DK Metcalf. Is Metcalf, though, the type of player, like he's generally not won by separating. He's generally won on contested catches or beating guys. Is he the type of guy you think that can command 9 or 10 targets per game? And could we have a sneaky wide receiver one candidate here?
Definitely possible. I think I think we're probably just seeing, instead of decline, we're probably seeing him hold on and maybe have a little bit of a boom. But I wouldn't necessarily predict a wide receiver one season from them. Also because the pace, right? So I think the pace is going to be slow. Aaron Rodgers traditionally runs the slowest paced offense whenever he's running it. And then if you look at like just sort of Mike McCarthy in his final season in Dallas, they were 17th in pass rate over expected. And that was a team, that tends to, Dak and CD, right? So they weren't exactly, a big passing team. As a matter of fact, that was a team that didn't necessarily have too much at running back either. So, I just think this is going to be a little bit of a slower paced, middle of the road pass attack in terms of volume and pass rate over expected. So they're not just going to come out slinging it. For those reasons, I think it's still going to be a little bit slower. I do think it's an uptick compared to the FedEx man.
Yes. Yeah. I think a positive and potential. I've got Metcalf right now at wide receiver 29 in my dynasty rankings. He'll be 28 at the start of next year. I think that there is a chance that he can get you a real profit as a contender at that cost. And so I'd be interested in buying him as a contender. Very good chance you get a wide receiver too there. Another team of fan base that wasn't super happy with their offensive court or their head coach choice was their old offensive coordinator, the Bills. Just sticking with Joe Brady. Now it's funny because the joke around this whole situation has been they just decided to blame Sean McDermott for everything. I thought we were done with that until this week when I see an article this morning, and I need to figure out who wrote the article, but basically with Joe Brady insinuating that Joe Brady's run heavy tendency wasn't Joe Brady. He didn't want to do that. It's that he just wanted to please his head coach and Sean McDermott. I kind of, when Brady was hired, was thinking, okay, so we're going to continue to see as many runs as passes, and they're just going to, even though Josh Allen is elite, they're going to try to nerf him for fantasy football. Is that your expectation, or do you have a little bit of hope that Joe Brady, now that he's actually in charge of the team, will go a little bit more pass heavy?
I find this to be some of the most dysfunctional things I've ever seen in my life, where they basically blamed the Keon Coleman just inadvertently dragged through this whole thing was hilarious. Like, well, I didn't want Keon Coleman. He wanted, they're all like,
terrible for the kid. Felt bad for him.
Of course, that was terrible. But literally, they blamed the offensive, coaching staff. Let me check notes. That's Joe Brady. And so there's a lot of finger pointing in this deal, and I think that really, it was just Bean saving his ass is really what happened here. This was a psyop to save himself. And then they somehow just elevate the guy. It's really dysfunctional, but I do think that, Josh has been great. The offense has been, to Bean's point, pretty successful. They've scored a lot of points. Right. How much of that is Josh? Probably 99.9% Josh Allen, because he's probably the best football player in the NFL at this particular point. So as long as you have Josh, you're gonna be fine. I do think it probably helps James Cook in the passing game, though. Their run efficiency has been outstanding. A lot of that is, of course, due to Josh, but I think you're going to see James Cook. I mean, he's got to be where do you think James Cook is at, like, redraft? Like, I mean,
I think he'll be a top 6 running back. Yeah.
So good, right?
And for dynasty purposes, he's not far from there either. I had him at
Agree.
6 in January, and it'll probably be close to there. I do want to ask about Keon Coleman because it's not been a great start to his NFL career. We did, though, see Brady saying to Keon Coleman, like, the best thing that could have happened to you was me getting this job. Is he worth throwing a late second or an early third round pick at in a 2026 rookie pick and just see if maybe his career can be revitalized, or is he to the stage where you're pretty much just giving up?
I mean, I was a zero cares Keon Coleman manager to begin with. Our wide receiver model did not like him coming out. We advised everybody to not draft him in Dynasty. We were correct about that. So we just don't have any real Keon Coleman. And for those reasons, I don't really see him as, the victim of an offense. I think he is more of a symptom and a cause of the offense. He's not look, we thought that when he came out, his best, road to success would be big slot. He just can't really separate outside. I mean, I no to answer your question. No. But I mean, I wish the kid the best. I mean, right. This isn't an anti-Keon thing, but I just don't think he's necessarily ever going to elevate to anything worth much, in the NFL wide receiver position.
We talked about Kevin Stefanski leaving Cleveland. He did not remain unemployed for long. Nope. Becomes the head coach of the Cleveland Browns, brings his offensive coordinator from Cleveland with him. Yep. So I think the expectation is now Kyle Pitts is a free agent. And Isaiah Likely is a free agent. And I think a lot of dynasty managers are thinking whoever the tight end is in Atlanta, they are going to be awesome. Is that a fair assumption in Stefanski's offense?
I think so. I mean, let me ask you, is this like the best signing for any team? Like
Stefanski? Oh, I think it's, for fantasy purposes, it's probably the clearest. Now, clearest, I think you can have questions about what this means for Drake London, and Stefanski's pace has generally been fantastic, which is really big. A lot of plays generally equals a better opportunity to have a lot of fantasy points, but there is some question, I think, about what Stefanski would like to do in terms of run pass split and what Stefanski provides for a wide receiver one. So I think while everybody's in agreement that whoever the tight end one is, this is a great thing. Is this a great thing for Drake London?
I mean, Drake London's dope. It's really hard to, is this going to be Kirk Cousins again next year too? Like this. So this is Kirk Cousins, Drake London, Bijan. Like this is interesting, right?
Right. No, I think it's probably a good thing for Bijan. It's a good thing for whoever the tight end is. And it's at least a little bit of a, because if they turn into one of those teams that throws it 530 times, and 130 of those targets are going to tight ends.
Is Pitts unrestricted?
Yes.
Wow. So what's Pitts going to do?
That's the question.
This is kind of a big decision then, because I mean, I think Pitts in this offense wheels all the way absolutely up.
He could climb back into the top 3 tight ends in Dynasty really quickly. Like, just see the target volume that David Njoku and Harold Fannin saw in Cleveland.
Yeah.
Give those to Kyle Pitts and watch.
Is that happening? What, like, because that's
we don't know
deal,
that,
bro.
I think I think probably what makes sense to me is if we can't afford Kyle Pitts, well, there's Isaiah Likely, and then Isaiah Likely delivers on the hopium that we've had for him for the last 4 years.
So the sneaky buy is Isaiah Likely then.
Well, unless Isaiah Likely ends up somewhere where it's awful.
Well,
I mean, on the Falcons, right? Yeah,
but isn't that where he's priced right now? He's priced right now that he's just a guy that might end up wherever or back up or But if he lands with the nuts, meaning tight end one in Atlanta, that's a whole different. That's a way higher price point. So might as well just buy Isaiah Likely on projection.
I would say that either Pitts or Likely, whoever's starting week 1 for the Falcons at tight end, and let's hope it's not something just completely out of nowhere.
Why
is
not
the top?
Both?
Top. Well, that might even be worse. Is a top 6 tight end for dynasty purposes. I don't even want to think about the headache.
You're welcome.
Both of those guys being on the same team. We had a couple other situations. And I tried to put the offensive coaches here before the break, the defensive coaches after the break. I didn't even include the Cardinals in my first breakdown that I sent to you, partially because I haven't been thinking about them, partially because I have no idea what to think of this roster or really even what to think of Mike LaFleur. LaFleur has been the offensive coordinator for Sean McVay. That generally leads to good things when coaches go somewhere else. He was also the offensive coordinator for the Jets. That was mostly a bad experiment. So are you excited about LaFleur in Arizona? And do you
kind of have to be, right?
Do you have any idea who the QB1 or wide receiver one is going to be for this team next year?
No. I would imagine they're moving on from Kyler. That's been the word. You would think that Mike LaFleur knows what they're doing there, because otherwise you don't just blindly take a job and wonder what's happening at quarterback. So that's probably moving on from Kyler. Is it, Brissett still? I don't know. This is why it's hard to have some of this analysis, because if you tell me exactly who the players are going to be, then I can answer the question. But look, if they just kind of run it back, I think it was something like McVay's last 4 offensive coordinators have gone on to be head coaches. So 4 in a row or whatever. So that's pretty cool. So that's been a very successful offensive scheme. That's been a great tree. But it's hard to imagine any more ceiling than they had last year. I think they were number 1 in pass rate over expected. Obviously, I mean, Brissett had the most pass attempts in a game twice last season. So I mean, he's got so it's hard to have more volume. So I think you have to turn down the volume when we do projections this year, and that's going to affect all the offensive weapons. They also would be in line to acquire a running back. They could be a running back landing spot, whether it be a free agent or one of these draft choices. So we'll see. I think there's going to be some changes, but I don't know if it's going to be Brissett or not. That's to me, that's the bigger question.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like with Kyler's problems playing within structure that he would fit well in a LaFleur offense, which is kind of all about structure.
Bingo.
I do wonder, everybody's making the connection of Malik Willis going to Miami and following the Green Bay new head coach. We'll talk about Hafley in just a moment. But I wonder if Matt says to Mike, we got this guy leaving Green Bay that would be a pretty good choice for you in Arizona. So maybe Arizona is another potential landing spot for Malik Willis as well. That will be interesting. Do you agree with me that this is probably a downgrade for Trey McBride targets?
I think everything has to be a downgrade for offensive targets there. I just don't think that you can have, so yes.
But I mean, even on a percentage basis, most coaches don't throw the ball to the tight end as much as Drew Petzing and Kevin Stefanski have.
True. Yeah, I guess that's true. I think Trey McBride is one of those sort of alpha predators at the position. He's really, really good. If you're not throwing to Trey McBride, you're crazy. But yeah, maybe a tick down. But I think if you're saying 2 ticks down, one meaning the volume raw for the team, and then also percentage wise, I think maybe, a sell of Trey McBride. Yeah, look, you're selling the tight end 1. You can't go up from there. So it's always a good time to sell when you're at the very, very top of the value.
Well, if you had to bet on one for next year, would it be Marvin Harrison Jr. or Michael Wilson?
Marvin Harrison Jr., if I had to.
I don't want to, but I agree with you. I'm going to lean towards the guy that hasn't quite shown me yet that he's not as good as I thought he was. I think there's a much better chance that LaFleur puts Marvin Harrison Jr. in positions to succeed than Petzing did. The other, let's save Harbaugh and the other defensive coaches for after our second break.
You got it.
This is European soccer's biggest stage.
Written in the stars. What a difference she has made.
The question is, can you handle it?
The crowd here feels electric.
Stream every match of the UEFA Women's Champions League on Paramount+.
So the New York Giants, they got themselves a Harbaugh. They thought they were getting themselves Todd Monken as well. They did not. Today, we found out they hired Matt Nagy, former offensive coordinator for the Kansas City Chiefs, former head coach for the Chicago Bears. This really brings things full circle for me, because I don't know if you know this or not, but on our main FFT show, Adam Azer, Dan Schneider, both huge Giants fans, and Dan spends so much time in the film for the Giants. And when Brian Daboll had his year 1 success, I made a lot of tweets comparing his year one to Matt Nagy's. And Daboll's history worked out very, very similarly to the way that Nagy's did in Chicago. Now Nagy's running the offense in New York, and it's a former Andy Reid offensive coordinator, and nobody ever knows what to do with those guys. Do you have any inclination as to what to expect from the Giants offense in terms of pass, in terms of pace, in terms of success? Or are we just, as much as we know about Matt Nagy, are we still walking into this Giants 2026 season a little bit blind?
I mean, I think it's a significant downgrade from Monken to Nagy. Yeah. Matt Nagy hasn't had a top 15 scoring offense since 2018. And I just must remind you, he has coached, checks notes here, Patrick Mahomes for the last 3 years. So a Patrick Mahomes offense over the last 3 years has not been better than 15th in total points scored for the season. That's not awesome. I'm not so sure that I think Matt Nagy's still holding on to that one great season as offensive coordinator in Kansas City. And then the surprising year in year one with Chicago with Trubisky, which is still an outlier season of epic proportions. But I don't even know, you may be able to answer this. Was he even calling plays his first year as OC? That I don't know. Maybe that was, I just don't know. In 17, I think it was his first OC job with Kansas City with Alex Smith, that first year for Patrick Mahomes. I don't know if he was calling plays.
I don't think when you look at Nagy and Bieniemy in Kansas City, there's always a little bit behind the curtain there. But I think the assumption should be that none of those guys are calling all of the plays. None of those guys are calling plays by themselves. Often Andy Reid's the only one calling plays, but those guys do have some input. I think the question is, how similar does Matt Nagy by himself, does his play calling look to what he did or what Andy Reid did? If you want to say Andy Reid did all of it.
Yeah, I don't know.
And I think it's better kind of looking at this as a mystery box. This is a team with some really interesting pieces. Jackson Dart at quarterback, Cam Scatterbo at running back, Malik Neighbors at wide receiver. They've lost Wan'Dale Robinson to free agency. But when you said it's a downgrade from Monken to Nagy, I think that the bigger question in terms of Dart is this a downgrade from Daboll and Kafka?
Probably, I think. I'm not too stoked about this. I mean, I think Harbaugh, obviously has some, gravitas and some professionalism and experience, and, he'll be a steady hand guiding the ship. But I just don't know necessarily I don't know. This is a new thing, right? These two together, right. The whole thing, I don't know that this is, we don't know what this is going to look like. And I'm a huge Jackson Dart fan, and this would not have been the way I'd scripted this in terms of offensive coordinator, head coach for him.
I guess if you want to be positive about it, Patrick Mahomes has run a lot as of late and ran more than he ever has last year. And so maybe at least we don't worry so much about pulling back on the reins of Jackson Dart.
And I'll speak to that. I think a lot of times when I watch the Chiefs, I just wonder where the easy button is. Mm-hmm. And for Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid, you would think there's a lot of easy buttons to push. And you just weren't seeing them as often. So was that Nagy, was that Mahomes, was that offensive line? I mean, I'm not putting that all on Matt Nagy, but you like to see a lot of that, and you see a lot of that in West Coast offenses and in different schemes. But we see it with, for Caleb Williams a lot. We see a lot of easy button throws and, especially early in the script. So I just think you'd like to see a lot of that for Jackson Dart. So he's not compelled to take off because, brother, he takes off. And, when he takes off, he's not as safe with his body as Patrick Mahomes. So, yeah, I'm certainly nervous a little bit for him. I do think Harbaugh will probably, if I had to guess, will coach Dart to be a little bit more safe with his body. Has to.
We had 3 teams that went the very defensive head coach and just bring in an offensive coordinator. Only one of them brought in an offensive coordinator we know a lot about, though. So the Tennessee Titans with Robert Saleh and Brian Daboll. Is this a good situation for Cam Ward, or at least a better situation for Cam Ward?
I think so. If it was Robert Saleh and somebody with very little experience, I would have been very dubious because I don't know. I mean, the only thing that we can say positive about Robert Saleh is he's had experience now being a head coach. So this isn't going to be like a whole new experience, but his first go around was not so good. Now he did so for the dysfunctional Jets, and maybe he gets graded on a curve for that. But we were not seeing a lot of discipline and things of that nature, with the Jets. So now what he does get, though, Robert Saleh, that is, he does get Brian Daboll, who also has head coaching experience, who now, sort of settles back into an OC role where he can really support Saleh. So I think it's pretty solid to have Saleh and Daboll together. And Saleh doesn't really have to worry too much about the offensive side of the football. He knows he has a former OC, former head coach, someone who's really experienced there to sort of steady that part of the ship, and he can focus on other things, defense and running the whole organization, which we'll see. I mean, he's got some energy. Hopefully, he has a little bit more sort of know-how because things looked messy in New York last time he was the coach. So
I think you make a good point about their experience, and that could be a real positive. I also think those personalities, if things go sideways, could be quite a show in Nashville with the Titans. Now, what we've seen from Daboll's quarterbacks pretty much universally is that they do run.
Yep.
What we've seen from Cam Ward is that he has the ability, but he almost never runs. Is there a possibility a little bit of Cam Ward's rushing upside gets unlocked with this offensive coordinator?
Has to, right? I mean, you would think. I mean, even the Cam Ward that we've seen, I was like, wow, no attempts. And toward the end of the season, he had a couple of games where he started to, and you know what? He was great at it. And those runs are great for fantasy, but they're also really good for winning football games because a lot of times when you run for 7 yards on 3rd and 6, that's a huge play. And being able to break pocket also puts pressure on safeties to kind of, do they press you or do they stay back?
Right.
I mean, obviously, that helps the pass game. Putting pressure on the defense is always a good thing and converting first downs. And that's what I think you get from a football standpoint with the quarterback running. Of course, we love the fantasy points that come from it, but also the fantasy points that come from advancing the football and converting.
So I just a kind of a question about all of these teams hiring defensive head coaches, and then do you, when you see that, do you kind of lean towards, well, they're probably going to be more ball control and slower and run the football because that's what defensive coaches like for their offense to do?
Yeah, maybe. That's interesting. I often think that, I've heard people say that everything is so compartmentalized that sometimes these head coaches are really just, managers of people. They don't actually, tell them what to do. They're like, I hope this offense works. And a lot of times it's so secluded and segregated in terms of who's in charge of what, that, a lot of these head coaches don't actually manage things that way. I find that to be interesting if it's true. Again, I'm not in an NFL.
I don't think it was true in Buffalo. Because I remember I think it was Zimmer, when he was with the Vikings, kept going through offensive coordinators because they wouldn't run the football enough.
Right. But you to the point, right? Exactly. You couldn't tell them to do so. And so, I think sometimes we overestimate what their input is on the offense. It's going to be like, Saleh's not going to be telling Daboll what to do at all. You know what I mean?
Right.
I don't think he's ever going to be like, if he did, he'd be like, excuse me, pal, I got the offense. You know what I mean? There's definitely that happening. Now, maybe with these guys that come together, Stefanski and Reese, not that he's not an offensive play caller, but, if you come, as one sort of, group, but, the Ravens with Jesse Minter coming from Chargers. Look, Declan Doyle, first-time play caller. That's why he took this role, right? So he was under Ben Johnson in Chicago. This is going to be his first time calling plays. This is actually, I think this is the wild card. If you gave me one that could be really awesome, really bad, I think it's Baltimore because, Declan Doyle coming from the Ben Johnson system, look, if he can bring some of that creativity and if he is truly on that level or, approaching that level and he can bring that to Baltimore with Lamar Jackson and put pressure on the defense like Ben Johnson does, but having a guy with Lamar Jackson's legs, that could be a huge, advantage for them going forward.
Well, and Baltimore is the exact opposite of Tennessee. Tennessee, we get a known quantity at both head coach and offensive coordinator.
Exactly.
Baltimore, we get neither, but we do get a defensive coach
Right.
and an offensive mind. I think the guy I'm most interested in terms of how these changes may affect the Ravens dynasty value is Zay Flowers, because I've long been a believer that Zay Flowers is awesome. I've been higher than consensus on him for most of his career, and that recently paid off this year. But I still don't think we saw what the ceiling is for Zay Flowers, because they're still throwing the ball 440 times per season. It's funny because when I mess with the projections, one of the things I start with is like, how many plays are they going to run? How many passes are they going to throw? And with the Ravens, with the old regime, we pretty much always had to assume that the passes are going to be in the 400s. And I guess my question is that just a function of having Lamar Jackson as your quarterback, or is there some upside? I don't think there's any upside that the Ravens turn into a pass-heavy team. But is there some upside that they become like a 40th percentile team in terms of passing instead of a 20th percentile team? And Zay Flowers all of a sudden becomes a no doubt about it wide receiver one.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. I mean, we look at pass attempts sometimes, but dropbacks can be a bit more than that because of the scrambles, right? With these running quarterbacks. Yeah, I think Zay Flowers is very good. He's their true alpha weapon, but there just hasn't been enough volume there to any one position to really elevate anybody. You know, I feel like I'm hoping that they are a little bit more multiple. You know, it was funny. Sometimes they'd play Derrick Henry and they'd be this one type of team. Then he'd come off the field and they'd be this entirely other type of team. Both times kind of being a little bit more predictable than you'd like them to be. You know, maybe now they'll be a little bit more multiple, even with Derrick Henry in the offense. You'd like to see some of that. I think you could throw the ball a little bit to Derrick Henry. The defense is not really looking for that. And I think that's always been an option for them, that nobody ever really pulls that lever. And I mean, him in space is dangerous. So we'll see. I again, as you point out, it's an unknown, but I would think that it can't get worse in terms of pass attempts. So yeah, I would be ticking them up a little bit for sure.
And what I was thinking was, well, maybe this guy won't throw such a high percentage of the passes to the tight ends.
Right.
Although it is worth referencing that before he was with the Bears, Declan Doyle was the tight ends coach with the Denver Broncos. So he may have an affinity for that position as well. I don't think this probably has much impact on Lamar Jackson. If anything, he probably, from just my guess, gets a little bit more freedom to do what he wants, because the guys who they've brought in don't have the gravitas of someone like a Lamar Jackson. So maybe he has a little more input. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's a bad thing. I saved the Dolphins for last. I don't mean any slight by that to our Dolphins fans. I made a Dolphins joke at church on the stage this past weekend, and somebody really took offense to it. Didn't mean to do that at all. You know, they got they got a good defensive head coach. Bobby Slowik has been effective as a play caller in the past, but it's another team where we don't know anything. I guess the only question I would ask, and this kind of goes to all of these guys with their tendencies versus the talent they have. The one thing Slowik's really not done in the past is throw the ball to running backs. In Houston, they had a very low rate of running back targets. Yeah. That would be really, really foolish with Devon Achane on your team. Is there any risk for Achane here?
I think so, for sure. I mean, any change. You know, it's interesting, as you were talking, I kept thinking, like, we're still a few weeks away, or, you know, maybe a few months away from all of this sort of clicking into position where it's like, once they sort of add free agents and draft players, and you go, oh, I see, this is how this is all going to come together. What quarterback is there? Look, they get Malik Willis. How about Malik Willis, the winner of the offseason? Because there's just this devoid of like quarterback options. Like, if we were going into next year's draft with all the quarterbacks available, I don't think Malik Willis would even necessarily be projected as a, you know, pencil him in somewhere this offseason starter. I think he'd be like, oh, maybe he might get a contract type of guy. So interesting to see what happens with him. I'd like to see him, like you say, with either LaFleur or in this Miami situation for sure. But yeah, I'm pretty excited for Malik Willis. But yeah, I don't know about Achane. It's, as you point out, it's a bit of an unknown. I do think that sometimes, you know, for sure, coaches play to their best players. I don't know that they necessarily wanted to feature, those running backs out of the backfield. I mean, what was that, Mixon, basically, right? I mean,
Mixon, I think it was some Devin Singletary mixed in there, maybe a Dameon Pierce year, something like that.
Right. So it's not like, they didn't throw it to Christian McCaffrey. It wasn't one of those situations where they really thwarted someone who was a huge pass catcher and then became a non-pass catcher under Slowik. So I'm hopeful that they won't be so foolish, because really, Achane is that, that queen chess piece on the field.
You mentioned Willis. Everybody that listens to this show know I've said several times over the last few weeks that he is a screaming buy right now.
Yes.
And I know you agree. Like, this is a guy who we're kind of valuing as he could be a starting quarterback. And I mostly view him as he. And I had some technical difficulties there. I'm not sure if I was the only one, but
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it was me or you. So
we're back. And so,
all right, great.
If that's going to happening at the 55th minute, after we've basically made all of our points, is the absolute best time for it to happen. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Tell everybody one more time about OTC and how they can get involved in it.
Yeah, man. I mean, so the website itself with all the cool tools, trade calc, and there's an AI function to it, and just really cool stuff coming. The site is probably March-ish, but ultimately everything else we're starting to do. The Undrafted comes with me. That's my podcast, Dynasty Underground. Also, find those everywhere podcasts are found. We're also simulcasting on the Player Profiler Network for both of those shows. So if you're already listening there, just peek us there. Follow me at Dino Game Theory, and then follow OTC Fantasy on Twitter for everything, because we're just kind of announcing everything there. So as things roll out and different things become available, it's going to be on OTC Fantasy on Twitter. Just check it.
Thank you so much, Jax. Always enjoy talking to you and kind of getting inside your mind a little bit as we try to process the new information of these coaching hires. Thank you to Emma for making everything work. Thank you to everybody who was active in the chat. We will talk to you on
Hell yeah.